Good afternoon and welcome to week 2 of Business 358, Business Law, and Blessings to All. In the second week, you should have reviewed Chapter 2 and analyzed ethics in corporate and social responsibility. That's primarily the topic for this session. And to kind of give you a quick overview of the chapter, what I'd like to do is start out with what I call quotes of the day. And the first is from Milton Friedman. The one and only social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. Milton Friedman was a Nobel laureate in economics. And then also the second quote I'd like to share is the business of business is serving society, not just making money. And that came from the Dayton-Hudson Company's corporate constitution. Let's talk about the theme of this chapter. Ethical behavior refers to how people should behave. An important point to remember is that while laws represent society's view of basic ethics rules, some laws permit behavior that some feel is wrong and criminalize acts that some feel are right. It is also important for you to examine ethical issues from a variety of points of view and to develop what I call your own life principles, the rules by which you live your own lives. You should always try to remember that every ethics decision you make shows your actual life principles, even if this doesn't match what you say. Some of you may be asking, what principles should we include and what personal rules should we have? These principles, number one, starts off with lying, which you should never do, stealing. Obviously, you never do that. It's a violation of one of the commandments. Cheating, and applying the same or different standards at home and at work. How about your responsibility as a bystander when you see other people doing wrong? In that particular situation, you have to be very careful. It's not worth losing your life by intervening in a situation that could bring death or bodily harm. First thing we ask is, what's the role of business in society? Well, there's two main beliefs about where corporate managers' primary responsibility resides. Some argue their responsibility is to the shareholders, while others argue they should consider all company stakeholders, including, say, employees, customers, and the rest of the community. These beliefs influence the actions executives take when they encounter an ethical dilemma. And I will tell you that when you move into the halls of management and business, those dilemmas are going to be hitting you every day, every week, every month, and every year. These beliefs influence the actions executives take when they encounter an ethical dilemma. And an ethical dilemma, the profitable choice is not always the most ethical one. And the most ethical one, vice versa, is not always the most profitable one. If an executive's only concern is maximizing profits, they will likely find themselves making unethical choices. And all we have to do today is look at the news either online or on the television set. And we see executives from Uber to other countries constantly in trouble or putting their company in peril because they've made the wrong ethical decisions. You might ask yourself, okay, I get the argument, but why be ethical? Well, the key issue is doing the right thing may not generate the greatest profits over the long run. It will lead to the greatest personal and community satisfaction and fulfillment. So you ask yourself, what do you need to be happy in life? And some of your answers may be money, fortune, fame. Many of you now realize that that's not the road to happiness. I can tell you firsthand as an entrepreneur and someone who has built a number of companies, one a publicly traded company, that money does not lead to happiness. If anything, the opposite occurs. And these are choices you'll have to make as you move through your career. Along those lines, is money an accurate measure of happiness? I don't think it is. I've known very, very few wealthy people, and I've known a lot of them that are truly happy. A lot of them end up dying alone. A very lonely existence, all the money in the world, but no friends, no family, because they've burned those bridges. So you have to ask yourself, are you willing to make a trade-off between reducing your earnings to spend more time with your friends and family? Think about it for a second. What trade-offs did your parents make? I think all of us, mine included, worked hard and went the extra distance to provide a quality life, not only for you, but for myself as well. Let's use an example. Let's say if after making a purchase at a local drugstore, you realize that the cashier forgot to charge you for an item. Or suppose a waitress forgets to charge you for the drink you ordered with your meal. What do? It's useful to begin an ethics discussion with small personal issues like this, because they seem more real than the abstract business issues you'll find in a textbook. Virtually everyone has had an experience such as these. Many of you have worked as servers and waiters. You know what it's like. How many of you has had to pay for items you forgot to charge the customer? In this way, you can see that your decisions have an impact on real people. I'll give you a personal experience. Several years ago when I was playing golf up in Orange County, I found a wallet on the fairway, and inside the wallet was $700 cash. And my first impulse was, hey, I have to find the owner. It wasn't to, hey, I'll take the cash and say I found the wallet. So one of the things, I took it back to the starter and I said, listen, I found a wallet that has a significant amount of money in it. And he said, well, give it to me. And I said, no, I think I'll hang on to it. If somebody comes in or calls you and says they have the wallet, here's my phone number. And I wrote it down. I said, have them call me. And what I was trying to protect was the cash assets in the wallet. It's not uncommon for people who find wallets to remove the cash and then return the wallet to the owner. I wasn't going to allow that to happen. And indeed, the next day I got a phone call from a gentleman who had lost the wallet. I asked him to describe the wallet and how much cash was in it. He said $750. I said, I got it. So then I ended up meeting him at a Denny's restaurant to return the wallet to him. And at that time, he took out a $100 bill and offered it to me. And I said, no, you shouldn't be compensated or paid for doing the right thing. And then in that particular situation, I made the right ethical decision. Also, society as a whole benefits from ethical behavior. I think mutual trust is a vital part of a successful society. And no society will survive long if the people constantly have to protect themselves from dishonesty, and the government is compelled to regulate businesses severely to ensure fairness. John Akers, the former chairman of IBM, he put it this way: there's no escaping this fact. The greater the measure of mutual trust and confidence in the ethics of society, the greater its economic strength. And if you look at our society and our economic strength, right now we basically lead the world. But to continue doing that with the next generation of managers, owners, entrepreneurs, we have to create the mindset that there has to be extremely strong ethics. The other thing is, I've discovered over the years that people, they feel better when they act ethically. And the reason is they don't have to worry about looking over their shoulder and wondering if somebody's going to finally catch up with them because of a lie they told, or maybe some ethical break they took in their life or in their job or in their business. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what kind of person do you want to be? In what kind of world do you want to live? All business people must ask themselves these questions when facing the opportunities to be dishonest. I think managers want to feel good about themselves and the decisions they've made, and I think also they want to sleep well at night. The next thing is how costly unethical behavior can become. And again, we've looked at recent stories in the news, the Harvey Weinstein fiasco and a bunch of others, where you had men in powerful positions acting unethically and taking advantage of others who weren't in powerful positions. As a result, they've lost spouses, careers, everything they own. Unethical behavior truly can be very costly. And it does not always damage a business, but it can potentially harm the bad actors and even entire industries and even entire countries. We had a situation back several years ago where Volkswagen adjusted or changed the readings on the output of their diesel engines. And there was a horrific blowback The CEO lost his job, a couple high people up lost their job, and they had to spend billions and billions of dollars in fines. That's a situation or an example where unethical behavior was very, very costly. So the question is, why take the risk? What is the cost of a lost reputation? What I always tell my students and the people that I mentor is the only thing you have in business is your reputation. And once you destroy that reputation, you have absolutely nothing left. And most of the time, it's pretty difficult, sometimes impossible, to restore that lost reputation. Unethical behavior can cause other subtler damage. One survey showed that unethical behavior in their workplace has reduced job stability, and profits. Unethical behavior in an organization also creates a cynical, resentful, and unproductive workforce. Hey, we're breaking the law. Why should I care? Hey, we don't care about the customers. Let's do whatever we want. You can't afford to have that mindset. Although there's no guarantee that ethical behavior pays in the short or long run, there is evidence that the ethical company is more likely to win financially. And if you look at the companies that have an extremely high level or standard of ethics, they're usually in the Fortune 100 or the Fortune 500. I think ethical companies tend to have a better reputation, more creative employees, and higher returns than those that engage in wrongdoing. And we even see large companies like Apple struggling with the fact that they basically use slave labor overseas in China. Is that ethical? Not at all. Yet Apple's perceived by many as social do-gooders, and I think they do a lot of good. But how ethical is it for them to pound on their chest and say, look at how ethical we are when they're employing child labor in places like China and Malaysia? But if we decide we want to behave ethically, we have to ask ourselves, or we have to know basically what ethical behavior is. And there are several theories on ethics. When making ethical decisions, people sometimes focus on the reason for the decision. They want to do what's right. If they think it's wrong to lie, then they will tell the truth. Other times people think about the outcome of their actions. They will do whatever it takes to achieve the right result. This choice between doing right and getting the result has been the subject of much philosophical debate over the centuries. One of the first type of ethics we'll look at is what they call utilitarian ethics. And under utilitarian ethics, a correct decision is one that tended to maximize overall happiness and minimize overall pain. Risk management and cost-benefit analyses are examples of utilitarian business practices. But the critics of the utilitarian theory, or the utilitarian line of thought, argue that it is difficult to measure utility accurately. It is also it's a little difficult to predict benefit and harm accurately. I agree with that. Then you have deontological ethics. That's a long word, deontological. Proponents of deontological ethics believe that utilitarians, they've got it all wrong, and that the results are not as important as the reason for which the decision is made. To a deontological thinker, the ends do not justify the means. The best-known proponent of the deontological model was an 18th century German philosopher and one of my favorites, Immanuel Kant. He believed in the categorical imperative. He also thought that human beings possess a unique dignity and that no decision that treats people as commodities could be considered just. The problem with this belief is that the ends do matter. The third is what we call Rawlsian justice, R-A-W-L-S-I-A-N. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The circumstances people are born in to dramatically affect their outcomes. That's what Rawlsian justice is. American philosopher John Rawls referred to these circumstances as life prospects. In his view, luck matters as much as hard work. And coming from the entrepreneurial world, luck is critical to success. You can work and work and work, but you have to have a little luck on your side. I'm just saying that speaking from experience. Moral universalism and relativism is the next type of ethics. Some people believe that particular acts are always right or always wrong, regardless of what others may think. And this approach is called moral universalism. Alternatively, others believe that it is right to be tolerant of different viewpoints and customs. And indeed, a decision may be acceptable even if it is not in keeping with one's own ethical standards. This approach is referred to as moral relativism. So we've talked about some of the moral ethical approaches. What are some of the traps you can fall into? Well, there's a number of them. Ethics traps create great temptation to do what we know to be wrong or fail to do what we know to be right. And here's a number of traps we can fall into. And we've already talked about the first one a little bit, money. Is money the root of all evil? Probably. I used to say no, it depends on the individual, it depends on the circumstances. But after having a long life in the corporate world, the entrepreneurial world, I would have to say pretty close to absolute certainty that money corrupts. What about competition? We're so intent on beating the competition that maybe we're willing to bend a few ethics, violate a few ethics. Don't do that. Even if you're tempted, don't do it. And how many of us rationalize our unethical behavior? Well, you know what? So-and-so from company B was doing it, so why shouldn't I do it? And that way we rationalize that what we're doing is okay. In reality, by using that rationalization, is what we're doing okay? No, it's not. How about the fact that sometimes we can't be objective about ourselves? We're more subjective. And we don't look at ourselves from the outside and realize that what we're doing is wrong. Then we have conflicts of interest. That's one of my favorites. And where you see the most conflicts of interest today is in politics. Many of our politicians on both sides of the aisle head off to Congress with the best of intentions and a small net worth, and 4 to 8 years later they come home and they're multimillionaires. People in their family have taken advantage of the benefit of some of the deals that politicians have been exposed to. I think conflict of interest is probably the biggest trap. And then conformity. Well, everybody else is doing it, so why shouldn't I do it? How about following orders? Hey, not my fault. My boss told me to do it. How far will that get you, particularly if you're accused or guilty of some criminal behavior? Not very far. And then euphemisms and reframing the problem. Well, it really isn't unethical. We're just changing this, this, and this. Don't get sucked into that. How about using the excuse or the trap being lost in a crowd? Well, we were just one of many and, everybody was doing it. Or perhaps you have a short-term perspective. Well, we'll do it until we get back on our feet or until we've got a little bit of money in the bank. The other thing are the blind spots that can come along. Got to be cautious of those. Those are what I call ethics traps, or as an ethic trap. So we've kind of discussed some of the traps. How do you avoid the ethical traps? Well, 3 practices can help you avoid these pitfalls. First of all, what I tell people, particularly the businesses I consult with, or even my students, is slow down. Life doesn't run at 78 RPMs. Slow down, pause, unclench, take a deep breath, and look at the problem. The second one is don't always trust your first instinct. And I beg to differ a little bit with the authors on this one. I slightly disagree. I think your intuition and what I call your gut instinct is very, very important. And if you think about it, how many times has your gut instinct said, don't do this, and you go ahead and override it and you do it anyway, and you run into trouble? I'm a very firm believer of listening to that inner voice when all of a sudden it sets off alarm and says, Pete, maybe not, you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing this. And then the third thing is remember your life principles. And what I tell students is to remember the golden rule, but I kind of refine it a little more. What I tell them is, what would your mother or whoever raised you, whether it was a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, what would they say if they saw you doing this or knew you were doing this? And if the answer is no, don't do it. Remember those life principles. So let's talk a little bit about lying. We are taught from an early age that we must tell the truth. Yet research shows that we all tell between 1 to 2 lies a day. Shame on us. When is lying acceptable? What about white lies to make others feel better? For example, hey, I really liked your lasagna, but the lasagna was horrible. Yeah, we all do it. I'm guilty of it. You tell little white lies so that you don't hurt people's feelings. But you've got to be cautious, particularly about the bigger lies, because if you lie and you constantly lie, then you have to remember each and every story you've told that is a lie, and eventually it'll come back to haunt you. If you tell the truth, you have no worries. Something comes up, hey, I told the truth, this is what happened. What are your life principles on lying? There may be indeed good reasons to lie. Obviously, to benefit other people, to protect children who say believe in Santa Claus. It is useful to analyze this issue now than to try to rationalize it later. Having thought about the ethics principles and traps, you now need to apply them to situations that are similar to those you are likely to face in your life. And as I said earlier in the lecture, there will be many, many times in life, whether it's in personal relationships or in business, where you have ethical decisions to make and you have to rely on your ethical principles. Personal ethics in the workplace. Should you behave in the workplace the way you do at home? Or do you have a separate set of ethics for each part of your life? The answer is, it depends. You can do things in your home that are politically incorrect. You cannot do that in the workforce. We've become such a litigious society now, you have to be careful with everything you do, you say. You have to be careful what you post on your social media. You can lose your management position or a very good position for things people have found on your social media. So you have to be really careful. I would say you have a different set of rules at work than you have at home. In my house, the principles are much softer. But when I'm teaching at any one of the classes I'm teaching at the various colleges, very, very careful what I say, very careful to make sure I framed it in the proper ethical framework. What if your employees behave badly outside of work? Should that affect their employment? Absolutely. In this day and age, you can't afford to have an employee who's a liability. And when I say a liability, doing something really criminal. If they do something really stupid, you just kind of laugh and say, hey, don't do that anymore. But if it's something that puts your company's reputation at risk or the possibility of a lawsuit, absolutely should affect their employment, and you need to get rid of them sooner rather than later. How about the organization as a whole's responsibility to society? Many products can potentially cause harm to customers or employees. What is a company's responsibility to those who are injured by their products? It's a good question. I think we all know now that companies have a social responsibility, and you'll see a lot of companies give away a certain percentage of their income to various charities or charities of their choice. Now you ask, what are their organization's responsibilities to their employees? Well, it's great. Unfortunately, employees aren't treated as well as they were 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they've more or less become a commodity. But I've found that the successful companies that treat their workers very well, they pay them a fair wage, good benefits, they don't lose a lot of employees, and they have very low turnover. But sometimes looking out for employees may not lead to higher profits. It may cost you a little bit of money. In these cases, does an organization have a duty to take care of its workers? I say absolutely, unless some of these steps will create to basically the metaphysical destruction of the company, then you don't do it. But to take care of workers and have them loyal and working hard for you, I think the company has responsibility. And I think that's one reason today why so many companies blow through a number of employees and they have such a high turnover rate. If they'd spend more time and capital investing on training their employees and showing them how to be loyal and effective, I don't think you'd see the high turnover rate that we see today. How about an organization's responsibility to its customers? We talked a little earlier about Volkswagen, how they basically hit emission numbers from all of the people who purchased their cars. And that blew up in their face. That was a huge, huge problem. Basically, your customers are another group of essential stakeholders, and a corporation must gain and retain loyal buyers if it is to stay in business for long. Even a giant company like Amazon, they always send you a questionnaire after you purchase something. Were you happy with what you got? Was the service good? And 9 times out of 10, you have to say yeah. Say yes to all of that. And that's one reason why Amazon is a huge company today. Treating customers well usually increases profits, and obviously it helps all the shareholders. But when, if ever, does an organization go too far? Is a leader acting appropriately when she puts customers first in a way that significantly diminishes the bottom line? The shareholder model says no. What do you say? Does the customer come first? Do you become so absorbed with the customer that it starts affecting your revenue, maybe affecting the relationship? I don't think that's ever a good idea. How about when the going gets tough? How do you respond to unethical behavior? Well, if you find yourself working for a company that tolerates an intolerable level of unethical behavior, you face basically three choices. You have the loyalty choice, you have the choice to get the heck out of there, your exit choice, or a voice. Let's look at three of these equally. Loyalty. Under loyalty, just because someone's judgment is different from yours does not mean that they are behaving unethically. Being a team player means allowing other people to make their own choices sometimes. However, the difference between being a team player and starting down the slippery slope can be very, very narrow. One of the big things in my life is loyalty. I expect loyalty from my family and friends. But that loyalty, I only expect it to go so far. If my behavior becomes unethical or illegal, then I don't expect people to be loyal to me. And conversely, I'm not going to be loyal to them. Another option is to walk out the door. You exit right out the door. And you do it quietly. You never make a big scene. This is probably the safest for you because you're not ruffling any feathers and you're not going to make any enemies. And one of the things you'll learn in business is you never, ever, ever want to burn bridges. You never know, you may have an opportunity down the road for that particular manager or president will want to hire you again. So don't burn bridges. But a quiet exit leaves the bad guys in a position to continue the unsavory behavior. In short, the braver and better option may be to exit loudly, reporting the wrongdoing on the way out the door. And an example of that is all the whistleblowing that goes on. When employees of companies see over a number of years abuse, illegality, they become a whistleblower, and they're protected under federal law. Some people choose that option, but I have to warn you, it's a tough option. They run you through the ringer when they do that. But sometimes it's hard to do the right thing or the ethical thing. And while wrongdoing often occurs because everyone just, goes along to get along, confrontation may not be the only or even the best use of your voice. Learning to persuade, cajole, or provide better options are all important leadership skills. These are skills you see in true leaders. What about the corporate responsibility? Well, we know companies have a duty not to cause harm, and you've had famous lawsuits against Monsanto, other companies that manufacture asbestos, that manufacture particle board, and we found out it was doing harm to the environment and to the people in general. So we know that they have a duty not to cause harm, but do companies have a corporate social responsibility, that is an obligation to contribute positively to the world around them? Do businesses have an affirmative duty to do good? Well, Harvard professor Michael Porter has written that CSR, corporate social responsibility, often benefits a company, and I agree. However, in Porter's view, a company should not undertake a CSR project. In other words, don't get involved unless it is profitable for the company in its own right, regardless of any secondary benefits the company may receive from, say, an improved reputation. So those are some of the things that you'll cover this week in the book. I look forward to getting your first week reports, and I wish you a blessed week, and I'll look forward to seeing you and talking to you next week. So have a great day.